It's easy to assume that people who pull away from love don't want connection. In reality, they're often the ones craving it the most. Thoughtful. And what if the strongest force of attraction isn't physical appearance, money, or passion, but emotional safety, quiet confidence, and the feeling of being genuinely understood? Today, you're about to discover psychological triggers that affect avoidant personalities more deeply than simple desire. Curious. These are the invisible forces that soften emotional walls, spark lasting attraction, and awaken feelings that most people never get close to reaching. Once you understand how the mind works, you stop chasing love and start becoming someone others naturally gravitate toward. Many people believe avoidants fear commitment, but that misses the real issue. What they truly fear is emotional risk. They worry about losing control, becoming overwhelmed, or depending on someone so deeply that it threatens the independence they've spent years building. If you don't understand this, you'll misinterpret everything they do. Distance may look like rejection, and silence may seem like indifference, when often the opposite is true. The stronger their feelings become, the stronger their instinct is to protect themselves. This changes everything. The greatest psychological attraction for an avoidant isn't pressure, seduction, chasing, or emotional intensity. It's emotional safety, the feeling that they can be themselves without being judged, controlled, trapped, or emotionally overwhelmed. That reaches places inside them that physical attraction never can. Most relationships begin with expectations. Reply faster. Tell me how you feel. Show me you care. Why are you pulling away? To an avoidant, those demands can feel threatening. Their nervous system interprets pressure as danger, triggering the urge to retreat. It isn't because they lack feelings. It's because old survival patterns are taking over. But when someone enters their life with patience, confidence, emotional stability, and calmness, something remarkable happens. The walls begin to lower. For the first time, closeness feels peaceful instead of dangerous. Human beings become deeply attached to the people who make them feel safe, not simply excited. Safety allows authenticity. When people feel secure, they stop pretending. They no longer need to hide behind emotional distance, sarcasm, excessive independence, or constant self-control. Avoidants learned long ago that vulnerability could lead to criticism, disappointment, rejection, or losing their freedom. So they became self-reliant and convinced themselves they were fine on their own. Yet beneath that protective shell, they still long for real connection. Emotional safety gives them permission to remove the armor they never wanted to wear. Creating safety doesn't mean becoming passive, weak, or endlessly available. Real emotional safety comes from inner strength and maturity. It comes from staying grounded without needing to control another person to feel secure. When you can tolerate uncertainty without panicking, you project confidence. When you communicate honestly without creating emotional drama, you build trust. When you respect someone's space without becoming cold, you demonstrate emotional strength. Confidence without pressure is incredibly attractive. Many people damage attraction because they react from fear. They chase harder when someone becomes distant, demand reassurance when they feel insecure, and try to force closeness instead of allowing it to develop naturally. But pressure never creates intimacy. It creates resistance. Think about the people who naturally make others open up. They don't criticize every word or turn every conversation into an emotional test. Their presence relaxes the nervous system, making authenticity feel safe. Sometimes their energy says more than their words ever could. You don't have to defend yourself with me. That kind of presence is rare, and rarity has value. Passion may capture attention for a moment, but emotional safety creates lasting attachment. Someone who has spent years feeling misunderstood or emotionally unsafe rarely forgets the person who finally understands them, and the process changes you too. To become emotionally safe for someone else, you must first develop patience, self-control, confidence, and emotional independence. You stop relying on constant validation and become secure within yourself. That is genuine strength. The strongest people aren't those who control others emotionally. They're the ones whose presence brings calm. If you want deeper relationships, stop chasing emotional chaos. Stop trying to force people to open up. Instead, become someone who naturally communicates peace, certainty, and emotional freedom. When an avoidant finally feels truly safe with you, they stop hiding, they stop running. They begin sharing parts of themselves that almost no one else gets to see, and that level of trust is far more powerful than desire alone. Another mistake people make is revealing everything too quickly. They over-explain, overshare, and invest emotionally before curiosity has time to grow. Then they wonder why the spark fades. Attraction doesn't grow through constant exposure. It grows through curiosity, emotional depth, and a sense that there is still more to discover. Real mystery isn't about manipulation or pretending to be someone you're not. It comes from living a meaningful life filled with purpose, passion, and personal growth. It means your identity extends beyond the relationship. For avoidance, this is incredibly attractive because emotional independence feels safe. When someone appears emotionally balanced rather than dependent, connection becomes inviting instead of overwhelming. People are naturally drawn to what engages their imagination. We're curious about what feels meaningful, but not fully revealed. When everything is available immediately, interest often fades. But when someone unfolds naturally over time, curiosity remains alive. Avoidants are especially drawn to people who are emotionally centered, not cold, but secure. People with goals, discipline, passions, and a fulfilling life outside the relationship communicate, "I value connection, but I don't need to control you to feel complete." That quiet confidence is magnetic. The most memorable people are rarely the loudest or the ones trying hardest to impress everyone. They carry a calm presence, a quiet sense of purpose, and a depth that reveals itself little by little. The more you learn about them, the more fascinating they become. That's the kind of mystery that creates lasting attraction. That quiet confidence is exactly what draws an avoidant closer. Many avoidant people spend years protecting themselves from feeling emotionally consumed. So when they meet someone who respects personal space, keeps their own identity, and still offers warmth, it challenges everything they expected. Suddenly, closeness no longer feels like losing their freedom. It feels safe, exciting, and natural. And for an avoidant, freedom is one of the strongest emotional attractions. Most people believe attraction comes from constant contact and endless attention. But often, attraction grows in the spaces between interactions. It develops during the pauses, when curiosity has room to grow. If someone leaves a conversation and finds themselves thinking about you hours later, you've created emotional impact. That doesn't happen by demanding attention. It happens because you're genuinely engaged with your own life. When you're focused on your purpose, personal growth, and future, your energy shifts. You stop obsessing over delayed replies or seeking constant reassurance. You no longer shape your identity around being chosen. Instead, you become emotionally independent. And emotionally independent people naturally make others feel free too. Here's what many people never realize. Desperation destroys mystery, and neediness destroys attraction. Purpose strengthens both. When your life has meaning beyond someone else's approval, people notice. Your conversations feel richer, your silence carries quiet confidence. Even your absence has weight. Avoidants are especially sensitive to this because, beneath their emotional distance, they often long for connection that doesn't come with pressure. They want intimacy that leaves room to breathe. They want closeness without losing themselves. Real mystery isn't a strategy, it's the result of living a meaningful life. It quietly communicates that there's always more to discover. Instead of demanding attention, it invites curiosity. Human beings naturally value what unfolds over time. When someone reveals themselves gradually through consistency, character, ambition, vulnerability, and self-respect, emotional attachment grows much more deeply. That's why mystery isn't about hiding. It's about having enough depth that people continue discovering new parts of you. Ironically, when you stop trying to force attraction and become fully invested in your own life, you become far more magnetic. The most attractive people aren't those begging to be noticed. They're the ones living with quiet certainty, purpose, and inner strength that others can't help wanting to understand. Many people believe attraction comes from being accepted by everyone. They spend years trying to earn approval, changing themselves to fit other people's expectations. They become overly available, tolerate disrespect, and confuse attention with self-worth. But the more someone depends on validation, the weaker their emotional presence becomes. Avoidants recognize emotional dependence almost immediately. The moment they feel responsible for another person's happiness, their nervous system begins to react. They feel pressure instead of connection. They feel trapped instead of free. That's often when they start creating distance. The opposite is confidence without emotional neediness. That creates attraction rooted in strength instead of fear. True confidence isn't arrogance. Arrogance is insecurity wearing a disguise. Genuine confidence is calm. It doesn't beg for attention or demand reassurance. It doesn't rely on applause to feel valuable. Confident people know who they are, even when no one is watching. That quiet certainty stands out because it's uncommon. Emotionally grounded people bring peace into relationships. They don't panic every time communication changes. They don't lose themselves the moment they fall for someone. They don't constantly ask for proof that they're enough. Instead, they quietly communicate, "I care about this relationship, but I also respect myself." That's incredibly attractive, especially to avoidants. Many avoidants grew up believing closeness could become painful. Love may have been mixed with criticism, disappointment, or emotional pressure. As adults, they naturally become cautious around anything that feels overwhelming. Clinginess, desperation, and emotional demands activate old survival instincts. But someone who is confident without being controlling feels completely different. That energy communicates emotional maturity. It says, "I choose to be with you, but I don't need to own you." The people who leave the deepest impression usually aren't trying the hardest to impress anyone. They're connected to their purpose, values, and self-respect. They know their worth without constantly proving it. You can hear it in the calm way they speak. You can see it in how they handle uncertainty without falling apart. You notice it in the way they protect healthy boundaries without guilt. Confidence builds trust because emotional stability creates safety. Relationships become exhausting when they're filled with constant panic, insecurity, anger, or emotional swings. But someone who stays grounded, even during uncertainty, becomes incredibly attractive. Neediness is often mistaken for love, but it's really fear wearing the mask of attachment. It's fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, and fear of not being enough. That fear causes people to overtext, over-explain, overgive, and over-sacrifice because they believe they must earn love. But real attraction can't grow where desperation dominates. It needs space to breathe. Avoidants respond especially well to people who maintain their own identity inside the relationship. Someone with goals, passions, friendships, discipline, and purpose feels emotionally safe because they're not depending on the relationship for their entire sense of self. Ironically, when you stop making someone your emotional lifeline, they often become more interested in you. Your attention becomes meaningful because it isn't automatic. People often give away their emotional energy too easily. They become available at every moment and abandon their standards to avoid rejection. But self-respect creates value. Healthy boundaries create value. Emotional discipline creates value. When you truly know your worth, you stop chasing validation, stop shrinking yourself for acceptance, and stop accepting behavior that steals your peace. Avoidants notice that. They may not always express it, but they're highly aware of emotional energy. They notice calmness under pressure, emotional stability, healthy boundaries, and people who don't manipulate, cling, or fall apart when life gets difficult. That grounded presence feels different. It creates curiosity instead of pressure, safety instead of obligation, attraction instead of resistance. More importantly, confidence without neediness doesn't just change how others respond to you, it frees you from living as though your happiness depends on someone else's approval. As you stop relying on another person's attention to define your worth, something important changes. You no longer measure your value by who stays or who walks away. Your identity becomes rooted in your character, your growth, your purpose, and your ability to master yourself. That is real emotional freedom, and few qualities are more attractive than someone who is genuinely free within themselves. When you no longer depend on constant validation, you become authentic. Your kindness comes from sincerity instead of strategy. Your affection feels genuine instead of desperate. Your presence becomes calming rather than emotionally draining. People naturally trust that kind of energy, and they remember it. Avoidant personalities are especially drawn to it because it removes the pressure they fear the most. So stop trying to persuade people to choose you. Stop searching for endless reassurance. Stop sacrificing your dignity just to receive temporary attention. Build a life filled with purpose, discipline, and meaning so your confidence grows from the inside out. When someone truly understands their own worth, they stop pursuing love out of fear. That's when their presence becomes unforgettable. Many people believe attraction is built mainly on looks, charm, or chemistry. Those things may create excitement at first, they can spark interest and even temporary obsession. But lasting emotional attachment comes from something much deeper, feeling understood, not judged, not analyzed, not controlled, simply understood. For avoidant personalities, that feeling can be one of the strongest emotional attractions imaginable. They spend much of their lives hiding behind emotional armor, becoming experts at appearing independent, composed, and self-sufficient. Vulnerability once felt dangerous, so they learned to avoid it. At some point, they discovered that opening their heart could lead to rejection, criticism, disappointment, pressure, or losing their freedom. Instead of expressing pain, they buried it. Instead of depending on others, they depended only on themselves. But behind emotional distance is often emotional exhaustion. Avoidants aren't without feelings, they're protecting them. When someone recognizes what's beneath that protection without trying to force it open, something profound begins to happen. Most people don't truly listen. They're already preparing their response, offering advice, fixing problems, or defending themselves. They hear the words, but miss the emotions underneath. Real connection doesn't grow from being evaluated. It grows from feeling safe enough to be seen exactly as you are. Imagine someone who has spent years hiding, finally feeling understood without pressure. The walls slowly come down. The mask begins to disappear. Trust develops naturally. For an avoidant, trust is one of the strongest emotional triggers there is. Being understood creates a level of intimacy that physical attraction alone can never achieve. Looks may capture attention, but emotional understanding reaches much deeper. It gives someone the relief of no longer feeling alone inside their own mind. That experience is incredibly difficult to forget. Real understanding is surprisingly rare. Most conversations stay on the surface. Most people are distracted. Everyone wants to be heard, but few people truly know how to listen. That's why genuine understanding becomes so valuable, especially to someone who has learned to hide their vulnerability. Avoidants often expect people to misunderstand them. They anticipate criticism, pressure, unrealistic expectations, or emotional chaos. So when they meet someone patient enough to understand their pace, their fears, and their inner world without trying to control them, everything changes. Connection begins to feel safe instead of threatening. Understanding doesn't mean approving of every behavior. It means recognizing the emotion beneath it. Most people react only to what they see. They interpret withdrawal as rejection, silence as indifference, and distance as a lack of love. Emotionally mature people ask a different question. What pain could be driving this behavior? That single question changes everything. Many avoidants withdraw not because they don't care, but because their emotions become overwhelming. Intense closeness can awaken fears of dependence, losing control, or being hurt. When those fears surface, creating distance becomes their instinct. Most people respond by chasing harder, demanding reassurance, or reacting with frustration and insecurity. Unfortunately, those reactions usually strengthen the avoidant's desire to escape. Understanding has the opposite effect. It creates calm. It offers emotional breathing room. It quietly communicates, "I recognize your fear without punishing you for it." That kind of maturity is rare, and rare qualities leave lasting impressions. When people feel genuinely understood, they stop defending themselves. They stop performing. Slowly, they begin revealing the parts of themselves they've hidden for years. That is how authentic intimacy develops, not through pressure, but through patience, presence, and understanding. Physical attraction naturally changes over time if emotional depth never develops, but being deeply understood fulfills one of the strongest human needs, the desire to be emotionally seen. Everyone wants someone who understands the struggles they never speak about, the fears they hide, and the contradictions they carry inside. When someone associates your presence with that kind of peace, a powerful bond begins to form. People become deeply attached to those who make them feel safe enough to simply be themselves. To truly understand others, however, You first have to understand yourself. You need patience, empathy, and emotional awareness. You must learn to listen without making every conversation about your own perspective. That level of maturity creates genuine depth, and depth creates lasting connection. Instead of trying to impress people with appearance, status, or clever words, learn to understand human emotion. Create conversations where people feel safe enough to remove their masks. Listen beyond behavior and recognize the feelings beneath it. When someone who has spent years hiding finally feels completely understood, they won't forget you. Not because you forced attraction, but because you offered them something almost no one else does: the freedom to be fully seen without fear. Many people believe love grows through constant texting, non-stop attention, and emotional intensity. They assume that holding on tighter creates stronger connection. But human psychology, especially for avoidant personalities, works differently. The more pressure an avoidant feels, the stronger their instinct becomes to create distance. Emotional control, obligation, or suffocation naturally produce resistance. Freedom, on the other hand, feels emotionally safe. Space creates something pressure never can. It creates curiosity. It allows emotions to settle naturally. It gives attraction room to grow instead of forcing it. Most people become anxious when they sense distance. They immediately chase, seek reassurance, and over-communicate because they fear losing the relationship. But desperation rarely strengthens connection. More often, it overwhelms it. Avoidants usually need time to process emotions internally. Many never learned healthy emotional expression, so they retreat, reflect, and regain emotional balance in private. Demanding immediate closeness often activates fear instead of intimacy. Giving someone space isn't weakness, it's emotional confidence. Insecurity says, "I need constant reassurance to feel okay." Confidence says, "I trust the connection enough not to control it." That quiet confidence changes everything. Instead of associating you with pressure, people begin associating you with peace. And human beings naturally move toward what makes them feel emotionally safe. Think about the difference between someone who constantly needs validation and someone who is emotionally secure. One leaves you feeling responsible for their emotions. The other leaves you feeling relaxed, respected, and free to choose closeness on your own. And when people feel free instead of trapped, desire has room to grow. That's simply how human nature works. People value what they are free to choose, and avoidant people feel this more strongly than most. When someone respects their need for space instead of reacting with fear or pressure, they feel safe. The relationship stops feeling like a trap and starts feeling balanced, healthy, and voluntary. Giving space doesn't mean becoming cold or emotionally unavailable. Healthy space says, "I care about you, and I also respect your individuality." It allows silence without panic, independence without insecurity, and emotions to unfold naturally, instead of forcing instant closeness. Ironically, people often move closer when they feel free. Many ruin attraction by demanding constant contact, labels, and reassurance before trust has had time to grow. Real connection isn't forced, it develops through patience. Space creates anticipation, allows someone to miss you, and builds emotional tension, which is essential for lasting attraction. Think of music. Its beauty comes from both the notes and the silence between them. Relationships work the same way. Healthy space gives connection rhythm. It lets emotions breathe instead of becoming overwhelming. Emotionally mature people don't chase certainty every time fear appears. They stay grounded, trust the process, and understand that anxiety rarely creates intimacy. That calm confidence is especially attractive to avoidants because they constantly watch for emotional pressure. When they meet someone who stays steady instead of panicking, they experience relief. Relief creates openness. Space is never the enemy of love. Pressure is. Strong relationships grow through trust, respect, individuality, and emotional balance. So stop trying to force closeness. Learn the strength of patience, calmness, and giving people room to choose you freely. The deepest attraction isn't built on beauty, status, or charm. Those may capture attention, but lasting connection grows from personal transformation. People are naturally drawn to those who develop emotional stability, discipline, self-respect, and a meaningful purpose. Many remain trapped in old fears, but growth changes how you show up. Quiet confidence replaces the need for validation, and emotional maturity creates a sense of calm that others naturally trust. For people with avoidant attachment, this grounded presence can feel safer because it carries less pressure and more consistency. When you heal your wounds instead of projecting them, you stop chasing approval and start living authentically. Love becomes something you share, not something you depend on. Purpose gives your life direction beyond relationships, making your confidence genuine rather than performative. Don't focus on making someone choose you. Focus on becoming the strongest, healthiest version of yourself. Real transformation creates the kind of presence that inspires trust, peace, and meaningful connection.